Hello and welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. I am Shamel Jordan, your host, and I am so happy that you are here today. Did you know that doing genealogy research could eventually lead to a life of crime? Yes, yes, your ancestors weren't all saints. I know most of them were, right? Most of them were. Tonight, we have two amazing quick starts for you. One quick start is inheriting your ancestral life of crime. We're going to talk about what do you do when you find that ancestor that isn't, Mother Teresa. Not that she was she is a saint. I love Mother Teresa. Let's not go there. Also, we have a very special guest today, someone who I have adored from afar for a long time because she is a specialist in the thing that we all need, which is social history, which is putting or creating family context from social history. And our special guest, Katherine Scott Studevant, will join us for the second quick start. So you guys know what to do. Those of you who are here, please definitely put your name into chat and let us know that you're here, where you are. We love to know where you are around the country. And also, if you're in a genealogy group, which of course every genealogist should be, let us know your genealogy group. We definitely love to hear about it. So let me bring on, my buddies. I call them now, I used to call them the regulars, but lately I'm calling them quick starters. So let's bring out first quick starter, columnist and editor, Jim Beidler. How you doing, Jim?
I'm the number one quick starter,
You're
by
the
the way.
number one quick starter. Okay, then that now that we have a hierarchy, let's bring out Michael John Neal, genealogy tip of the day. And he gave us is that a piece or are you
That's
accepting number two?
I am accepting best for last. So there we go. More, whatever floats your boat, as they say.
Well, you don't want to be number three out of the two of us. Let's just say that.
Uh, well, if your math skills are that bad, then your genealogy research skills probably aren't the best either. We'll just leave it at that.
So you guys in the social history, have you had any really good cool social history things that really opened up uh, your family history research?
When did you ask us this question in
Oh,
advance,
I'm sorry.
Jamel?
I'm sorry. That's okay. That's okay. So let's go ahead and let's see who we have here today. Let's see who we have. Of course, we have Judy. Hello, Judy from Chicagoland. Hello, Kathy Wiseman. So nice to have you here. Dean Henry is here from AAGG. Hi, June Hall from Cleveland, Shaker Heights, Ohio, AAGS in Cleveland. Thank you so much for being here. If you have not told us who you are, or your genealogy group or where you're from, let us know. Whether you are watching live or in replay. Hello, Wanda Looney. I knew you was out there. I had to call you out. Wanda Looney from Birmingham. And we have Jean who's here from like 1,000 genealogy groups. She is definitely a genealogy groupie. Guys, thank you for being here. So on to the questions that I did actually ask, which was, what's your quick start for today? So, our quick start for today is inheriting your ancestors' life of crime. So, what's this quick start going to be all about?
Well, I'm going to start this first because I noticed Jim's examples that he gave us did not come from his own personal background. I don't know if there's a statement to be made there or not, but we talk about court records and research, and those are valid records to use. But this time we're focusing on a certain part of court records, those that document criminal activity, and some crimes, those stories are passed down to the present generation, but many times they're not for a variety of reasons, sometimes obvious reasons. And, they might have been very petty crimes. We might not think to research. They could give us clues about our ancestor. And it does do a nice tie into the social history that we're doing in the last half of this session, because we're getting at some of that when we find out some of these criminal activities that your ancestor might have been involved in. The court records, the newspaper documentation about this can give us some background information. It might not give us birthplaces and all that kind of stuff that we like to have, but it can give us some good background information.
I always love, some people like dread this, but I think it makes it more exciting when you have criminal ancestors. Don't you guys think it's more exciting?
That's why I have such a boring background, because like Michael alluded to, I couldn't even find an example from my own pedigree. That doesn't necessarily mean there aren't any in there, but
They were good at what they did.
well, no, for the most part, they were just one farmer after another. But
Okay.
Well, yeah, sometimes even farmers get into all kinds of, as in one of our examples we're going to see. But something I was going to say just totally eluded me. Oh, the excitement about finding these things. They're less exciting when it's very recent. If it's something of a certain heinous nature and it's recent, that's a whole different ball game from some of the things that we're talking about.
I would
and that's
agree.
what we're focusing on, things that are a little bit further back that we don't have any emotional investment in, and we're detached from them. That makes it a lot easier to really dig into it. Whereas if it's more recent and more personal, there's reasons sometimes why people would prefer not to do that. And sometimes that's understandable.
So can we just take a incy bincy second just to talk about that part where people are connected to these stories, and even though it might be your ancestor and you might find like this sensational case or something that they did or were involved in, how do you share that with the family? That's a little different than saying, oh, look, here's the marriage record of great-great-grandma. How do you share criminal activity that you find of your ancestral past?
My theory, if it's been over 100 years, I just, whatever, I don't broadcast it from the rooftops and go on about it incessantly, but I'll put it on there in their genealogy database files. If I got them on a web page, I'll put that on there. If it's more recent, kind of depending upon what it is, if it's a minor horse theft, if it's selling alcohol, things that are kind of like minor, that's different. If it's murder or heinous interpersonal crimes in the family, if you will, I think you've got to be a little more, if individuals living were involved at the time, then you've got to be a little more aware of that. The other flip side of that, though, is if I find it in a newspaper that was a public record, or a court that's a public record, then my theory is I'll put it on my website or in the family tree that's online, because I'm not telling something that is not already available. If it was in the newspaper, people knew about it at the time. The story might not have been passed down 50 years later, but it's in the newspaper, people knew about it. So that's different from finding something in a church record of baptism that mentions something. It's a kind of more of a private record, and that we stumbled on. That's different from something in the newspaper, at least in my perspective.
Well, I think you start the conversation if it's more recent and everything. So, you know how you like those Dateline in 48 Hours episodes? ...
I love that. I'm going to try that. That's a nice lead in.
That's a good way to start that conversation.
It opens the conversation. And hey, Shamel, don't forget a few more people have checked in, including Kathy Doyle from California. Thank you.
All right. Hello, Kathy Doyle from California. And of course, Wayne and Grace Ann from down the road. And hello, Anita Payne. We have two Clevelands here. From Fayette County, Tennessee. All right. Nice to have you here. Thanks for that, Jim. All right. So let's go ahead and get started with this quick start that I'm very excited about as soon as I can find my right click. So step 1 for inheriting your ancestral life of crime. So step 1 is do you have an outlaw in the family? So you guys out there, tell me in the comments, do you have an outlaw in the family? So we would like to hear, do you have an outlaw in the family? And Michael, Jim, how do you find out if you have an outlaw in the family?
Well, sometimes you'll be told, people, sometimes they don't, but great grandpa was a horse thief is the common phrase that's thrown about. Maybe that's what he actually did. Maybe that's not actually what he did. But sometimes the family stories will get passed down. We're going to talk about newspapers are a great way to kind of segue into the court records and other documents that we'll talk about. If it was anything of note, there's probably going to be a reference to it in the local newspaper.
You just need to listen carefully to all the family stories. And I had a family reunion that I was involved with where I found a will of a family member where she disinherited one of her sons because, and this is a quote in the will, I have good reason to believe he made an unsuccessful attempt to kill me 20 years ago. And when I revealed that at a family reunion, not in front of the whole family reunion, but just when we were doing some sidebar conversations to a descendant, he kind of nodded and he said, well, he was in across the mountains from where most of the family was. And he said there were rumors that the reason he went across the mountains was that he had been in trouble with the law somehow. So that was reverse engineered, but that got the information out.
What a great story. All right, so search those newspapers and keep your ears open. Do some Googles. There's a lot of court records online. Oh my goodness. I found some stuff that I
and
really...
if your ancestor was in a war and he got a pension, this is not a major crime, but bigamy often gets discovered in a pension file. Your first encounter with your ancestor's bigamy might not be in a court record if you don't think to look there. It could be in the pension file.
It's called contested widow.
That's a gentle phrase for it.
I never heard that gentle phrase. That's pretty cool.
No, that's what they write on the file, contested widow. And
I don't think that's what the neighbors used to describe it. We'll go with that.
That's because you don't have black people. That's why.
But yeah, all right, pensions were one place to get some of that too. Clues.
It's a great place to get that. Pensions are the best. All right. So step 1, you have an outlaw. We all have outlaws. Step 2 is research the crime in the newspaper. So kind of talked about that. Did you guys want to share anything else about?
The only thing about newspapers is I would make sure I'd gotten all the references to it. The initial time something happened, it depends on how bad the crime was and how likely there would be to be a follow-up. There might be a follow-up shortly after the crime. And then if you later, when you find out there's court records, also search for it again during that time period when the case was held at court, because there may be additional references to it with more detail. Depends on how sensational things were. But when it goes to trial, there may be additional mentions of it in the newspaper beyond what's originally published.
And the note I would make is, remember, don't settle for just one newspaper account. There usually were competing newspapers, or if not competing newspapers, ones in other counties that were supplementing each other. So
most definitely,
especially since newspapers are often political, especially back then. If your ancestor was a member of the right political party, one paper might have a very positive view of what happened, and the other one might have a totally different. And the truth is somewhere probably in the middle. But it goes right back to what Jim said. You want to get many perspectives on that, not just one.
And like you guys said, like there's multiple accounts. And then also sometimes it seems like newspapers are just copying each other. And so don't overlook those, because sometimes they'll add like this little golden nugget, like at the end. It's like, what?
Well, so yeah, sometimes they'll add stuff, but a lot of times they were making stuff up. Yeah, Kathy Doyle just posted in the chat about how it would be picked up across the wires. And in my newspaper book, we have a case study from Janine Bjork about how a sensational crime was picked up across the country, and no two newspapers matched in the details. I mean, it was like a kid's game of rumor. But yeah.
Oh, we have someone related to some. Let's see. I was thrilled. I was related to those terrible turtle murders and dalliances galore in early Connecticut. Go, Susan.
And hey, how about Dean Henry, who says about family members of Moonshiner? Forget about the records, Dean. Did you get the recipe?
Yeah.
Keep in mind, if they got caught, those might be federal court records and not local
Yeah.
court records.
Yeah.
Yeah,
good
okay.
point.
We're going to get into the records.
Right, because you got to remember what laws you're violating, or your ancestor, not you personally.
Yes, don't take it personal. Okay, so we're at the newspaper stage, so we're looking at the newspapers, and don't just focus on that one. You look before, after, check out the whole thing. And then step 3 is to look for court records. So I love what you just said about check which law they were actually breaking. So there's multiple levels of checking records, and also like how recent can we check? Because it seems like in New Jersey, it has to be like in the 1800s. So,
well, if we're talking about local records and even state records, state statute would dictate whether they're how public they are and when you can access those. In some states, relatively recent things you can access. In other states, there's going to be some variation there. The one thing you want to think about with court records, especially when we're talking about local court records, is what court would have heard criminal cases. Sometimes the word, it'll be criminal court. Sometimes there may be another word in the name of the court that locally hears those criminal cases that your ancestor might have been involved in. And then if it's a federal kind of case, moonshine sometimes is a violation of federal law, then that's going to be a federal court that might happen to hear that. Now, if you just simply get arrested for illegally selling alcohol to a minor, as one of mine did, then that was a local county court record of, I think it was 1890 or something.
We're all confessing today. What did your ancestors do? Let's all just let it out. Let's just let it all out. All right, so that was step 3, to look at court records. So I would suggest going to Family Search Wiki. That's like my place to go. I know a lot of people like that. Or just do a search, Family Search court records, and they have links to the different court records that they have that you can see.
You really want to make certain you're getting into the court, because sometimes the chancery court and the civil court might not be hearing these criminal cases that we're talking about. So you want to, the local. The county courthouse sometimes could help you, but a local historical or genealogical society, somebody familiar with the area, could tell you this is the court that would have heard a criminal case in Coshocton County, Ohio, or wherever the location may be.
And I always would Google to find and learn the court structure. There's like a state structure, and there's a great one online that shows the structure for Georgia, like what all Chancery and Superior, and like what do they all do? There are great places to find those online. We're going to show you some stuff in a second, but let's move on to step 4 is to access additional records. So what additional records might people find besides court records, newspapers, for their criminal ancestors?
One that comes to mind, if the case was appealed, there might be a record of the appellate court that heard the case. In that case, it might appear in the various reporters that would summarize rulings and decisions in appellate court cases to a state Supreme Court, for instance. Many of those reporters have been digitized and are on Google Books. I've not found criminal cases of my own there, but I found civil cases that were appealed to the Illinois, Nebraska, and a couple other states' courts. And the first reference I actually found to those court cases was in Google Books, because it was appealed to the state Supreme Court. They issued a decision, they either upheld it or what have you, and their summary is in those reporters. The older ones have been digitized and are on Google Books. And then in those cases, it referenced the original court of jurisdiction where the original records were located. The nice thing about those reporters, if your person does appear in there, those are digitized. You can access those online, usually through Google Books is where I start to access those.
And definitely check out our former special guest, Judy Russell. She is the legal genealogist, and she has a blog, The Legal Genealogist. So check that out. Let's see. Judy has a story to tell. Judy says, the worst I found was when my great grandfather threw someone out of the harness shop for bad mouthing the president. Oh, no. Which president was it? He didn't get into trouble over. Oh, good. Okay. Good. That's a good one. All right. So then step 5 is to analyze, of course, and step 6 is to document your findings. So let's take a look at what you guys have to share. Slides, share my screen. And here we are. I love this one. Of course, Jim didn't have any, but he's going to rat Terry out.
Yeah, well, this is a census record, and it shows my girlfriend Terry Bridgewater's several great grandfather William H. Stiles. By occupation, he's a molder, but by profession, he's a forger. Because it's noted that this is the Ross County, Ohio jail, and they use the far right column, which is technically for statuses of whether they're deaf, blind, etc. And instead, they put the crimes of each of the people. And I should have given you the page in front of this too, because one of them was in for murder.
Oh, wow.
In this little Ross County jail. And if you have the detail shot, you can hone in on Stiles, who went on to become a pretty important Civil War. I believe he was a captain in the Civil War. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, but let's just say we think he rehabilitated himself. Terry always says that she's glad at least he wasn't just a horse thief, that he was a guy who had some skills.
Yeah. Yeah, anybody could be a horse thief. Thank you for that, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Before we take a look at this one, Sharon did mention a good point. If your ancestor was incarcerated in a state prison, you might want to look and see what records there are. Those would typically the ones that a genealogist would want to access. Older ones, state archives would be a place to start with that, but there may be reference to that person in a state prison record. And that's how I found that a person of interest for one of my ancestors was pardoned by the governor. And then I got the pardon records from the Illinois State Archives, the application for the pardon and the details about that. This example is...
Oh, and just one other thing on prison records, Eastern State Penitentiary and Western State Penitentiary. There's a lot of prison records that are available to you online. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. This one is from Fleming County, Kentucky. And my ancestors' hogs were butchered and stolen first, butchered second, I don't know, by the neighbors. And this is one of the resulting court cases. This also makes a good point of why you want to research the neighbors, because my ancestor was not sued. It was the Commonwealth of Kentucky versus the Reeves brothers that were the actual individuals that did this. But they were my ancestors' pigs, hogs, and he is referenced in here.
Well, how did you get to this if your ancestor's name is not on the case? How did you know to look at this case?
I had a researcher knew about it that lived there, and she made copies of it for me.
Okay.
That was
very cool.
And I just read through it, and there was a reference to James. It also references James's son in there as well, because his son and the neighbor boy are the ones that actually discover. They follow the trail of blood in the snow. There's depositions and testimony about all this. Anyway, a lot of details, a lot of social history there, more about hog butchering in 1827 than I probably needed to know is in some of the other documents that we don't have here.
I love that. I love that. So what do we have next here?
This one isn't quite as bad as the first one. This one's a little more recent. This was from 1935. I was not aware of this. This nugget was not passed down. This is my great-grandfather, whose name is spelled wrong. supposed to be M-I-M-K-E, not M-I-N-K-E.
Spelling doesn't count in genealogy. You
It
know
does
better.
not. I know that it doesn't count. And the thing is, though, I put his first name in. It didn't find him because his first name was spelled wrong.
Gotcha.
Anyway, he initially had refused to have his cattle tested for tuberculosis, and he was not going to do it. And apparently, he was released on $1,000 bond in 1935,
Yeah.
and that was enough to convince him to go ahead and have them tested. I can see how that might change your mind. He must have been one of the last holdouts that refused to do that. He's the only all my great grandfathers had livestock. This is the only one who went to this point with refusing to have them tested.
He was an anti-vaxxer, even for
he was. My grandfather, he was mentioned in, I think, the 1960s or 50s. He was arrested for bringing. He bought cattle in Missouri, brought them back home into Illinois, crossed the state line, and didn't have the appropriate paperwork about their vaccinations, and he was paid a fine. I don't know. He wasn't arrested like this, but there was a charge. He was fined for inappropriate paperwork when he brought him across state lines. So you just never know what your ancestor might have been arrested for. It's not some of the things we might think of necessarily. You're violating some part of, in this case, something about state statute.
Yes, and I think in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people, it was a badge of honor
in certain
to show up
circles,
arrested,
yes,
or to have an FBI file. Everybody wanted to have an FBI file, right? Wayne from down the road said, mine were just politicians. Nobody got arrested. All right, Wayne, be nice. I thought you were nice, Wayne. All right, and mine, I just Googled my dad, and my dad was a gun runner when he was 22 years old. I found this in the papers that he stole 14 12-gauge shotguns with his friend. I like his friend's name, Frank Bartucci. So I want to see. I'm a research Frank Bartucci and see if he has any descendants, so that we can enjoy this together.
This is a good way to get. We talk about the extended kin network and the friends and the fans and all that. You know, who they're committing crimes with is a good way to get people that are in the fan network.
And they were probably in the motorcycle club together. All right, guys, thank you so much. Let's go through your steps really quickly on getting that person of crime. Where is the quick steps? So here we are, right? Oh, dear. I do have them. Maybe not. I don't see them. So the steps for, and I'm just going to go through them because I don't see it. Yes, the steps for inheriting your ancestral life of crime is first, do you have an outlaw in the family? Step 2 is to research the crime in the newspaper. Step 3 is then to look for the court records and FamilySearch.org. And step 4 is to access additional records. Step 5, of course, we're going to analyze and document and share it with everybody. Share it with everybody because everyone loves. This is a story. People want to hear stories, not process issues that you had finding stuff. All right. Thank you, Jim and Michael.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. All right. Let's get ready for our second quick start. Give me a second. All right. Welcome to our second quick start. And tonight we have a woman who is like, I've wanted to know her forever because she does something that genealogists, we all need this. We're all on the hunt. We're all pulling these documents, and our goal is to tell the story. Well, you can't tell the story with dates and ages and sexes and stuff like that. You need to know the history. So let's bring out Katherine Scott Studevant to share context creating context for your social history for your family.
Hi, Shamel.
Hello, Catherine. And guess what? We match. We didn't even
Isn't
plan
that
it.
amazing? I just thought I want to have a bright, nice color
And
on your show.
You did a great job.
And I just, by the way, love my predecessors on the show. They were great.
Aren't they fantastic?
So interesting. And so I have to mention one thing I thought of first, and it's actually the Studevants. It's my husband's side, but he has the Studevant gang from New England and New York in the 1830s or so, and they were counterfeiters.
I love that.
I wish we had it. They did it with coins and minting coins, and I wish I had even one of those, but they didn't pass them down. But they did have a place called Studevant Cave.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like the westerns, the really cool westerns.
Yeah, it's fun to find that stuff. It really is, and it is definitely history.
It is history. So, Catherine, we ask all of our show guests to share with us their 1-minute genealogy story. How did you get started, and how did you know that you were hooked?
No, I think I got started primarily because my folks, I happen to be adopted. These are my adopted parents. My folks were telling me so much family history of their parents. And my mom especially had her mother's memoirs, which I still would like to publish. So I started there. I knew I was hooked, I don't know, probably overnight. But I mentioned I was adopted. So one thing that double hooked me was when I realized I could use the skills I had to also find out my biological background. And so I'm lucky because I have 2 different families from each side. I can go back in many different ways and certainly found plenty of colorful criminals in both.
So before we get started with your quick start, I just want to, I have a blur on. I think everyone, this is your book, Bringing Your Family History to Life Through Social History.
It probably seems like a blur when people start to read it, but they'll get it.
No, it's a fabulous read. It's an easy read. And what I would like to, the one thing in here that I think we all need to know as genealogists, and I don't know if anyone has put this in their book, and I want to just bring it out up front because I try to share this with people too. Genealogists, we scare people when they realize who we are. And you confirm that for me, that we scare people. So before we get started, I just would like for you to share why librarians and archivists are kind of nervous when they realize we're family historians. And just a quick tip on a couple tips. I think you have a slide in here that I'd rather you talk to it on how we can be good genealogists when we go out in public.
Okay. Well, when we get to the slide, I'll mention the pledge
that
I have my own students in family history classes take. But we need to, first of all, not tell too many stories for too long. We need to realize that every genealogist does this when they approach and get excited about their research and they approach a librarian or an archivist. Also, I think my presentation might help people put your families in context, because then you can say, I'm interested in researching what the Civil War was like in a certain county at a certain time or something like that. So they don't even know.
So have a plan of what you want, not walk in and say, well, my people were living here since the 1860s and I found my so-and-so in the so-and-so census and it said so-and-so and so-and-so and so. Don't do that.
Don't tell everything, and don't assume that they're going to pull something off the shelf that is perfect for your family, all about your family. You're going to have to do the hard work. And what you want to do is sound a little bit more, unfortunately, it sounds snobby, but you need to sound a little bit more like a historian or a professor or a graduate student or anyone who is in that more generic interest of history, not the genealogy. The genealogy tends to give the mistaken impression that you're kind of self-centered and you assume everybody will be fascinated by your individual story. And what you're trying to do is get as much good stuff out of them as you can. So you really want to
Exactly.
butter them up.
So come with a plan and be brief. I
Yes.
would say so. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pledge, but let's go ahead and get started with your quick
Sure.
start, which is creating family context from social history. So can you first tell us what is social history?
Okay, and the slides will also help with this. Do you want to show them now or do you want me to wait a little bit?
I would rather you talk to me about what
All
social
right, I will
history
do that. Social history is the history of all people, including ordinary people and their everyday lives. In fact, it might be even leaning toward what we were just saying genealogists shouldn't expect, in the sense that social history really is usually about the whole population of a given place and time and whole families. And so you can see here, ordinary people's everyday lives make up social history. And so if you read it, if you research it, it tends to be based on all the records that were out there to say, characterize a town or a type of person or an ethnic group or anything. The social historians are out there putting together not just statistics about everybody, but anything they can find, including diaries and letters and all the things we love. They're trying to put that together to get the bigger picture of a society at a given time. And that means not only can you get from it what your ancestor society was like, but you can contribute to it as well.
Okay, fantastic. So let's look at step one for family context or social history is, of course, choose a family story.
Okay.
And that's part of the plan, right, Catherine? You choose one and you
Yes.
get started, right?
Yes. And also choosing one family story, like you just heard the guys doing. Choosing one family story means that you can build that biography around that person, all the information you can find on that person or that story. But if the story is fascinating to you for reasons other than just that it's your family, if it's a colorful story like a criminal story is, then you can find more and more. The guys could easily find more on that kind of crime or that kind of activity going on in a particular place. So you can find a family story and start to build out from it and connect it. I think you'll get so caught up in it that you won't feel so much like you're all by yourself. You'll realize, oh, this fits into what happened then and that for that kind of person.
So, like Michael with his tuberculosis, his anti-vaxxer ancestor who didn't want to, that might be a good story to try to dig in a little deeper about. That might
Well,
be
and this is a little farther afield, but I suddenly thought of when I saw that, I've been watching the wonderful PBS series from Britain, All Creatures Great and Small.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a huge controversy in that series about TB inspecting and whether the doctor, the vets, the veterinarians would even maybe lie about some of the farmers' livestock because the farmers didn't want to have to part with their livestock.
So it's a common thing. So it might be a historical thing to see if he was, alone or there were a lot of people getting fined.
I think there were probably a lot of people at least hesitating.
All right. So you're going to choose a family story.
Right.
Step 2 is then to isolate impressions. What does that mean?
Well, it could mean lots of things, but one thing that it means is, again, within your own family and its stories. If you're following this one family story, try to pick out by talking to people or writing to people or looking at any documents they've left, and then, of course, the public documents. Can you isolate what people had to say about this or what they felt about this? Try to get that, not just a statistic or, he got arrested on this day, but Was there something maybe embarrassing in the newspaper, as you were saying before? Or did family members pass it down because something about that story was really exciting or really disturbing?
Mhm.
So try to
Mhm.
get all those humanizing aspects, because those are always good. Those are going to appeal and be something that you have. And that's also one of my strong messages. You have your family materials and stories, and they need to survive you. And so if you start writing them together, putting them together in a way that lasts longer than you do, then you've isolated something that's hard to get, which is people's impressions of each other and other things around them.
Yes, the impressions actually turn them into flesh and bones.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So
Yes.
isolate those impressions. Um, let's look at step 3, which is to categorize the story. So what does that mean? Like what genre? Like if this was going to be a movie, like I like to think of my genealogy like a movie. And if it's going to be a movie, is that what you mean? Like is it a horror story? Is it a murder
Well,
story?
kind of, except I'm pointed in the history field, and so I would categorize it into things like, okay, if this ancestor is a counterfeiter, was counterfeiting a common crime? What context
Mm,
can I find in historical record? And that includes mostly published books. I'm talking about books that might be there in the library, that will tell me how common was this. Was counterfeiting common because they used to always mint coins and even let other people mint their own coins for a
yeah,
period of time? You
true.
know, look for, is it political history? Is it women's history? Is it part of the history of childbirth? Is it history of a particular war?
Mhm.
Learn some history and find where does the story you're looking at fit into that history, because then you'll start to find parallel situations that help you understand yours better and know what else to look for.
Can you give me another example of another story and how you might categorize it?
Okay, let's see. I have a story that, um, well, I'll share a one that's the major discovery when one looks into one's birth before putting up for adoption. And I knew that my mother was a young woman who was not married. I knew that already.
Mhm.
But as I did more research and I thought of the time period, I realized that this was a time when young men were coming and going from war. In this
Mhm.
case, Korean War and just military service, even. And I had heard
Mhm.
something about military service. So I started to put that together, which sent me into all kinds of records, of course. I also had wanted to have a feeling about that story that wasn't just secretive or unhappy. And so as I researched all of those people at the time, I was
Mhm.
able to understand, oh, this is why they didn't get married, or
Mhm.
this is why their parents didn't really want them to get married,
Yeah. Yeah.
or this is what they were doing in the rest of their lives that might have felt like it would be ruined if they had an unwanted child. All of those things that give you context mean a lot personally when you find them. They help dramatize this story. My goodness, it makes a good soap opera,
Yeah.
and it helps you know where else to research. So figure out the time period and what was common. For example, it was common in that time period, if a high school age girl got pregnant, to send her away to have the child,
Right.
so that
Right.
everyone would guess what was happening, but they wouldn't know for sure.
Right. Right. Right.
So all
Okay.
of that context, look for the context.
And often we are, no, I wouldn't say, I would say I would hear because, I don't have the experience as an adoptee, but often we hear of um, wanting to connect with the family to ask them why. Sometimes the
Yes.
family knows like there might be something, but doing your homework and understanding more about, I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that story. So you
And
want
I
to
did, by the way, contact. And
Say
I
it
do
again.
now have, I have all sorts of, I never had brothers and sisters, and I certainly do now. And all
Fantastic.
kinds of good things came out of it. But I think partly because I was very careful and it was very planned.
Yes. Yeah. I would love to have you back to talk about the maybe an adoptee quick start because it's
Sure,
very
I would
interesting.
love to do that.
All right. So step 4 is then to question what happened to the norm. Can you explain?
I mean by that, what happened to anyone that was in that position or that type of person? So let's say, and I was thinking this in particular when one is trying to figure out either African American or some other ethnic group, some category of person that you've just figured out. And now you're going to try to figure out what was common. Did they send their daughters away?
Mhm.
Did they have to be very careful to avoid the wrath of another part of the community on them?
Yeah.
Did they have a military service experience? And was it normal to have that experience, or was it out way out there somewhere?
Mhm.
The norm of why did people move from point A to point B?
Mhm.
Why did that family migrate? Because it's going to happen almost always that if you
Mhm.
find your family migrating, you're going to realize it's a mass movement. It's
Mhm.
a well trod path that they're taking as they migrate for similar reasons. So always try to figure out what was the norm. And on the one hand, you may think it's more interesting for your family member to be way beyond the normal, and do something really strangely out there. But you're going to find more material that helps you through social history if you can figure out what that norm was and look for those patterns.
Fantastic. Yes, the norm. I learned a norm based off of just asking my grandmom how did she get from Alabama to New Jersey? And I learned about the picking bus. The picking bus used to bring people from Alabama to the north to pick during the summer. And so they would come to the town where I grew up in Berlin, which was a farming where they would all go and pick during the summer. And it turns out that was a migration pattern because in the town, there's a whole bunch of people from Eufaula, Alabama. And I never knew that growing up as a child. And if I didn't ask the question, and then I read up on it. And indeed, that was a migration path, like you said. And that was a norm for people. I wouldn't think to go from Alabama to New Jersey to pick. You would think you would do that
Right.
down south. So,
And that's a very similar pattern for a lot of Mexican Americans whose families for years and generations picked um, in some northern place
mhm,
and ended up moving there or
mhm,
staying there. Yeah.
mhm. All right. So what happened to the norm? Oh, I wanted to ask you, are these books good? They have these books of what happened, what was life like in the 1860s or life like during the Civil War. Are those good books to help you to understand maybe
I
what
think
happened
you're
to the
talking
norm?
about ones that are kind of written for a more popular audience. It doesn't
Yes.
sound like a scholarly history book.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you. Thank
that's
you.
okay, but that's good because frankly, we scholars are not necessarily the best at writing entertaining reading that's accessible to everyone.
This is true.
And so I hope I am, but I know a lot of people don't even care to be doing that. So
No, your writing is very good.
thank you,
So
but
let's look at step
do
5 is to research your history connected to story.
okay.
So give us an idea of like great sources for social history. Like give us an example that would help folks.
Okay, so there are dozens and dozens of books about the Great Depression, for example. And almost always you can find, unless it's some kind of esoteric economic analysis of why this happened in the stock market. I don't hope for that. But I do have hope for books that are about society and life during the Great Depression because they tend to focus on the general population and what was happening to them. Certain time periods just naturally cause historians to focus on the larger society. So if you were trying to figure out how your ancestors lived, what was sort of popular culture at the time, what were the nicknames they gave to people, how did they socialize or have a life when they couldn't afford anything, how did they lose a job, what did they change that to earn some money, what was the banking crisis like for the little person. You're going to find a lot of those things in history books about the Great Depression. So you have to get used to looking for the social history. And frankly, when I said what I just did about depression, remember movies, because It's a Wonderful Life is my all-time favorite movie. And it's not just a Christmas story, it's a great story of what it was like in the Great Depression. Right?
Yes. Love that. Love that. So research, so examples of, let's see, let me look at our time. So I would love to have examples of, maybe of any of the stories that you shared or another story that you might want to share, and where you went or what book or what thing helped you to fill in some social history.
All right. When I think I mentioned that my grandmother's memoirs, and this would be my adopted mom's mom, my grandmother's memoirs that were so precious to my mom that she wrote for her children when she was dying, are wonderful about her childhood in particular, which was in Goodland, Kansas. And so I knew right away what I needed to do was research Goodland, Kansas and the life there at that time, and also just generally Midwestern life. They were a family that moved out to build a sod house, they thought, which wasn't too practical after all, and thought that it would be just great and very successful to live out on the plains of Western Kansas, which it really wasn't. But she told the stories from her child's eye view, almost like Little House on the Prairie.
Oh.
And so what I needed to do was not only research that in my libraries, I needed to go there. And I started by writing to the library. I looked up addresses and I wrote to the library and I wrote to the mayor, because I know how small towns are. And I was able to find out from those folks that the guy in town who knew the most about the local history was someone who hung out at the library a lot, of course. And his name was Mr. Parker. And I started to write back and forth with Mr. Parker, who was founding a historical society with a newsletter. And I not only made a lovely friend, but I already got photographs of my family. I got newspaper stories. I got explanations of everything about the town's development. So when you figure out the isolated, and you have to isolate one at a time, the isolated pieces that you could try to research that way, you need to try everything.
And I love that story, because in every community, there's that guy or
especially
that
small ones, especially small
that
communities.
knows the stuff. And when you do exactly
sometimes it's a lady.
Yes. When you connect.
Yes.
So I just learned, I didn't even think of that as social history. But when you connect with the people who are on the ground, they give you the details of what is happening on the ground now and what was happening on the ground back then. So that's kind of like your live kind of social history. Genealogy is not done in a bubble, in isolation. You have to kind of do it with others, right?
And just like we were insinuating that we genealogists tend to talk too much about our own special families and projects, it's going to happen with that kind of local historian too, which is great, because that person will be so excited.
They'll be excited to talk to you more than those librarians who don't want to hear our stories.
Yes, you want to find the person who's bit by the bug just like you are.
And then your last step was to actually go ahead and document your family story. So I want to go through the steps, and then I want to share the pledge. So the steps for creating family context from social history is: 1, to choose your family. 2, you want to isolate the impressions. Step 3, you want to categorize the story. Step 4, what happened to the norm? Do the research. Step 5, research your history connected to the story. And of course, step 6, you want to document and share. And I want to show you Catherine's books again for you to know about. So, Catherine, thank you. I'm going to bring back I'm going to bring back Jim and the floating head known as Michael. Catherine, we really appreciate you here tonight to bone us up on some social history. And I'm going to share the pledge really quick so everybody can see it. And we're going to be better researchers. Here's the pledge.
Okay, this is my whole slide that includes the pledge, but you'll have to show me. You'll have to look at me because you have to put your hand up.
Okay, we all have our hand up because we're taking the
Okay.
pledge. Oh, my right hand. Let me be honest.
Oh, that's right. I have to be right too. Okay, so the pledge is I will not tell any librarian, archivist, or other person helping me with my research any more than they absolutely need to know to help me with that research.
I will. I promise.
I wonder how many liars were out there taking the pledge. Because they're all liars. We can't help ourselves. But it really does help if you surprise the research helpers with how businesslike you can be instead of telling them everything.
So thank you so much. Everyone is very happy and excited. Judy said thank you. Wayne said, Wayne, we have to talk. It was a place where farming people came to live to go work in Hamilton and do farming. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I'm finding it. I found